January 18, 1945. Ardennes Forest, Belgium, it was cold. The kind of cold that crawled into your bones and made you question your choices. Private Danny Mercer, barely 18 and fresh from the flat cornfields of Iowa, had never seen snow like this before. Not the kind that layered everything in deathly silence. His breath fogged thick in the air as he stood beside the stuck Willie's Jeep, half buried in a ditch of frozen mud and snow. The driver, Sergeant Brannigan, cursed under his breath while kicking at the tires. They were part of the 101st Airborne's Advance Reconnaissance Unit, moving supplies and orders through the narrow, icy trails of the Ardennes. The Battle of the Bulge had slowed in recent days, but they were still deep in contested ground. Behind them, the sound of artillery was a constant growl. Ahead, the forest stretched dark and broken, trees shattered by shrapnel and snow hanging heavy on naked limbs. "Come on, Mercer. Push the damn thing!" Brannigan barked. Danny dropped his rifle in the snow and moved to the back of the Jeep. His gloves were too thin. The metal bit at his palms as he gripped the frame and heaved. The engine revved, tires spun, but the Jeep only rocked in place. Again. This time, Danny put his shoulder into it, boots digging into the slick ground. The tires found a bit of traction and jumped forward. Just a foot, maybe two, but it was enough to shift the weight. He pushed harder, teeth clenched. The Jeep lurched, then the rear axle caught on something solid, something metal. "Whoa! Whoa! Stop!" Danny called out, stepping back. The Jeep tilted slightly, like it was resting against something under the snow. He crouched and began brushing the white crust away. What he found wasn't a rock. It was too smooth, too clean. The curve of cold steel emerged, painted in the faded green of Wehrmacht camouflage. "Hey, Sarge," he said slowly, heart starting to pound. "This thing's on something. I think it's German." Brannigan killed the engine and stepped out, drawing his Colt .45 from his belt. The two stared at the growing shape beneath the snow, edges of track links, a bent tow hook, a flat engine deck. "Is that a tank?" Brannigan muttered. Danny had seen pictures in training manuals. It looked like a Panzer II, maybe a 3, but smaller, stranger. More of it emerged with each kick of snow. And that's when he saw the markings. Iron cross, half scraped off. Burn marks. The entire rear was blackened, like it had been hit. But the odd thing wasn't what was on top. It was what wasn't. No turret. Just a sloped, welded-on steel shell. It wasn't a tank. It was a trap. A noise, a quiet click, snapped Danny's attention to the rear deck. There, beside the exposed exhaust pipe, was a small, hand-twisted wire connected to a rectangular steel box. His blood froze faster than the forest around him. "Sarge, back off! It's a—" The explosion wasn't huge. It wasn't meant to be. The vehicle didn't erupt in flames like the movies. Instead, a sharp, concussive blast echoed through the forest, throwing Danny backward into the ditch. Brannigan screamed, not in pain, but surprise, as the rear of the Jeep flew into the air and slammed down with a crunch. Snow rained down from the trees. Birds, startled, took flight. Then silence again. Danny scrambled up, ears ringing, heart racing. The Jeep had fallen onto its side, the rear axle completely torn off. Brannigan lay groaning in the snow, hands over his ears. "What the hell was that?" he gasped. Danny pointed at the mangled shape beneath the snow. More of it was exposed now. It wasn't just a wreck. It was made to look like a wreck. Welded shut, camouflaged. But the insides were packed with explosives and wires. "Booby trap," Danny said, voice shaking. They made it look like a stuck tank. Like bait. Later, when engineers were called up and cleared the area, they confirmed it. The trap was a fake Panzerette, a fabricated German vehicle built on a salvaged chassis, rigged with mines and designed to look like it had broken down during a retreat. A clever piece of deception. American soldiers had been known to strip parts or try to push these vehicles off the road to clear supply routes. This one had waited beneath the snow for weeks. They found two more along the same trail that afternoon. One was real. The other wasn't. Danny Mercer didn't sleep that night. He kept seeing the wire, kept hearing the click that nearly killed him. The war wasn't about the big tank battles anymore. It was about things that looked harmless, things half buried in snow, things that didn't move. And sometimes, all it took to trigger them was a teenage boy trying to be helpful. The morning after the explosion, Danny Mercer sat wrapped in a wool blanket, knees drawn to his chest, staring into a small campfire outside a temporary command post. His hands trembled, not from the cold, but from what had almost happened. Brannigan was alive, nursing cracked ribs and a ringing ear, but the blast had done more than tear up the Jeep. It had rattled everyone. Captain Hale arrived just after dawn. Tall, quiet, and sharp-eyed, Hale was the kind of officer who didn't waste time with speeches or sympathy. He pointed at the burned-out chassis half buried in the snow. "Mercer, walk me through it," he said flatly. Danny stood, still sore, and walked Hale over to what remained of the fake tank. Engineers had picked through the wreck already, confirming it was a deliberate decoy. They'd found pressure plates under the tracks, tripwires hidden under branches, and even a set of dummy shell casings arranged to sell the illusion of a disabled armored vehicle. "They wanted us to push it," Danny said. "Or climb inside, or try to tow it." Hale's jaw flexed. He crouched near one of the exposed weld lines. This wasn't some last-minute trap. This is manufacturing. Planning. They wanted us to think this was a salvageable tank. Danny nodded. "It worked. I almost died trying to do them a favor." What chilled him wasn't just the explosion. It was the precision. The Germans hadn't just left a mine under some rubble. They had designed a trap that depended on American behavior, that assumed soldiers would be curious, helpful, maybe even greedy. It meant someone had studied them. By noon, word of the booby-trapped Jeep tank had spread down the line. Other recon squads were finding more just like it. Wrecks that weren't wrecks at all. One squad west of Danny's patrol found a derelict half-track packed with frozen corpses dressed in SS uniforms. When the medics went to examine the bodies, the ice cracked, and a secondary blast killed two of them. It hadn't been a grave. It was bait. That night, in a small huddle of GIs sitting around a fire, the talk turned bitter. "They're not fighting fair anymore," Private Lenny Carver muttered. He was a New Yorker, loud even when whispering. "Booby-trapping tanks? Rigging dead Krauts with TNT? That's not war. That's cowardly." Danny didn't speak. He just kept staring into the fire, replaying the sound of that click. Sergeant Walker, their squad leader, had a different take. A veteran of Normandy, and a man with more scars than fingers, he leaned forward and jabbed his pipe toward the fire. "It's desperation. We're in the bulge, boys. This is the end of their rope. They've got fuel shortages, they're low on armor, and they're losing ground every day. So they do this, psychological warfare. They want to make you afraid of everything. That's the point, not just killing you. Breaking you," Carver snorted. "Well, it's working." Walker looked at Danny. "You're quiet, kid." Danny hesitated, then said softly, "If I'd pushed harder, I wouldn't be here. Brannigan either." "You are here," Walker said, "and now you know something most don't. The rules are changing. They can't win with firepower, so they're trying to outthink us. You just outthought them." But Danny didn't feel like he'd outthought anyone. He felt like he'd stepped into something designed by a ghost, a German trap maker who'd never see the blast go off, but had built it anyway, like a message written in shrapnel. "We're still here. We're still watching." 3 days later, they found another one. This time it was more convincing. An American M3 half-track with what looked like blown treads and a smashed hood, parked beside a tree line. It was even painted with U.S. markings, a perfect copy. except someone had placed it facing the wrong direction for a retreat. Danny spotted it first. "Stop the column!" he yelled. Now. Brannigan, still bandaged but back behind the wheel of a different Jeep, slammed on the brakes. Dust and snow kicked up. The rest of the convoy froze. Danny walked forward slowly, rifle raised, his boots crunching in the fresh snow. His breath fogged as he moved, every nerve screaming. He stopped 20 feet short and raised his binoculars. That's when he saw it. The snow around the vehicle was too clean. No tire tracks, no footprints, just a perfect halo of untouched white, like it had been placed there from above. "Don't touch it," he whispered. Behind him, Brannigan climbed out and nodded grimly. "They're getting better." Danny lowered the binoculars. "No, we're getting smarter." The next day brought the coldest morning yet. Trees stood like frozen skeletons, cloaked in a layer of ice thick enough to snap branches under their own weight. Frost lined the barrels of rifles, and men breathed into their collars just to keep their noses from burning in the wind. But it wasn't the weather that had the men on edge. It was what came over the radio at 4:20 hours. 3 more decoy tanks, all rigged, all lethal. 2 GIs had died trying to tow one. A third had lost both legs when he stepped onto a tripwire disguised as a tow chain. Command issued an immediate order across the division. No vehicle, Allied or Axis, was to be approached without full engineer clearance. But the damage wasn't just in the numbers. The damage was psychological. Men started to question every abandoned Jeep, every truck parked too neatly, every tank that didn't have frozen tracks behind it. Some began to refuse orders to move vehicles at all, even when it delayed supply runs. And for the Germans, that was the point. They weren't just slowing the American advance. They were making the Americans afraid of their own machines. By mid-morning, Mercer's squad was ordered to move west and check a supply trail that had gone silent overnight. A convoy of 3 trucks was overdue. HQ feared they'd hit mines, or worse. Danny rode in the back of a half-track, wedged between crates of 30 cal rounds and fuel drums, trying not to look at the burned-out vehicles they passed. Too many of them looked staged. They reached the trail by noon. Snow covered most of the ground, but there were signs, tire ruts, frozen footprints, and then twisted metal. The first truck had hit something. It sat crumpled on its side, front end sheared off, hood thrown 20 feet into the trees. But what caught Danny's eye was the second vehicle. It was still upright, still pristine, and still idling, Brannigan pointed. "Why's the engine running?" Walker raised his binoculars. No movement inside, no driver. The truck was full of medical supplies, the kind usually guarded like gold this close to the front. But no one was around it. No blood, no bodies, no shell casings. "Booby trap," Danny said immediately. "It's too clean," Walker nodded. "We're not touching it. Engineers will handle it." But as they turned to pull back, a voice crackled over the radio. "Alpha Team, be advised. Possible false positives. Not every vehicle's rigged. You may need to recover." Boom! The truck erupted, not in one big blast, but in 2. The first detonated beneath the cabin, a pressure plate. The second blew the cargo bed sky high, sending bandages, morphine vials, and shrapnel in a 50-yard arc. Danny hit the ground, his helmet knocked sideways by the blast. He came up choking on snow and smoke. Pieces of metal rained around him. A tire rolled past, still on fire. Walker had taken a piece of glass to the neck, but was already applying pressure. Brannigan's sleeve was scorched, but he was conscious. Danny stared at what had once been a truck, now a blackened frame coughing flames into the sky. "Jesus Christ!" someone whispered, and then it hit Danny. They hadn't just rigged a fake tank or a decoy jeep. They'd taken real American equipment, real trucks, and turned them into traps, which meant the enemy had been inside their lines. The idea spread fast. Fear followed. Men started double-checking every crate, every barrel, every snow-covered tire. Radios buzzed with reports of friendly-looking vehicles placed along routes soldiers trusted. The Germans weren't just planting bombs. They were planting doubt. Later that night, while the medics patched Walker and the engineers picked over what remained of the convoy, Danny sat alone with a notebook he'd kept tucked in his coat since basic training. He wrote down what he'd seen, the way the snow was clean, the way the truck engine ran but no one sat inside, the smell, gasoline and something sharp underneath it. He sketched the pressure plate as best he could remember. He didn't know why he was doing it. He just felt like someone needed to, like maybe someone else might read it and live because of it. He looked up as the engineers waved over. They'd uncovered a third explosive device under the third truck, a timed fuse this time, set to go off if someone tried to hotwire the ignition. It was rigged for curiosity. Danny felt sick. They were in a war where doing the smart thing could get you killed. But so could doing the brave thing. So could doing nothing. That was the worst part. There were no safe choices anymore, only traps you saw, and traps you didn't. That night, no one really slept. The fire crackled in a pit, dug deep to hide its glow from enemy eyes, but the light didn't warm anyone. Not anymore. Every pop of the fire sounded like a mine. Every shifting shadow behind a tree looked like a German scout setting the next trap. Danny Mercer sat on his helmet just outside the perimeter, his M1 carbine across his knees, eyes red and wide open. Brannigan walked over quietly and crouched beside him, nursing a flask that smelled like gasoline and regret. "You hear the radio chatter?" Brannigan muttered. Danny nodded. He had. Everyone had. Another patrol, Charlie Company, had found something worse than a fake tank or rigged truck. A body. One of theirs, wired with explosives. The Germans were baiting the wounded now. Brannigan rubbed his eyes. Guy was still alive, they said. Crying for help. Booby-trapped. Corpsman went to lift him, and boom. Took out 3 more. He shook his head. "You believe that?" Danny didn't answer. Because he did believe it. The Germans weren't just fighting dirty, they were fighting desperate, and desperation bred evil. The kind of evil that could look a wounded man in the face, wire his chest with TNT, and leave him behind as bait. "You know what's messed up?" Brannigan went on. "The Germans used to be precise, tidy, orderly, blitzkrieg, tanks, uniforms pressed tighter than a colonel's ass cheeks. Now they're laying in the snow like goddamn feral animals waiting to blow off a leg or two." He took another swig. "It ain't war. It's murder in a snowstorm." Danny finally looked at him. Maybe it always was. They sat in silence after that, but the silence didn't last long. Just before dawn, a call came in. Unit Alpha 9 had gone dark 3 miles northwest. 6 men on a resupply run hadn't reported in. HQ feared they were dead, or worse. Caught in one of these new traps, the Wehrmacht had taken a sick joy in laying Lieutenant Kane. Their new officer, green but steady, gathered the squad. "We're going to find them," he said bluntly, eyes scanning the faces of men who didn't want to go. "Command says this stretch is still active. No armor, no vehicles. Strictly on foot. We're to investigate, recover bodies if possible, and do not touch anything unless it's breathing." The woods were worse than before. The snow was deeper, and the trees denser. Every step sounded too loud. Every crunch underfoot made hearts jump. Danny walked point, rifle up, eyes sweeping every snowbank and ditch like they were landmines. Because they might be. The air smelled faintly of cordite, the sour ghost of old explosions. They reached the coordinates an hour later. What they found was worse than a massacre. It was a scene, like someone had staged it. The 6-man squad was there, sort of. 2 corpses lay on their backs, clean holes in their helmets. Another was face down, missing both arms. One was impaled through the gut on a rusted iron fence post. But what made every man freeze was what sat in the center of the clearing, a still burning fire, and beside it, a plate of food. Warm. Real. Brannigan whispered, "What the hell?" Danny raised his rifle instinctively. "Don't step forward," he warned. "None of this makes sense." Lieutenant Kane moved carefully around the perimeter, eyes sharp. "Look at the way the snow's packed. These guys didn't just get ambushed. They were herded." And then Danny saw it, near one of the bodies. A tripwire. Faint. Thin. Almost invisible in the white. Almost invisible in the white. He followed it with his eyes. It led to a broken crate beside the fire. Inside the crate, a radio. One of theirs. Still blinking. It was transmitting. Still transmitting. And then it hit him. This wasn't an ambush site. This was a recording. A loop. The Germans had killed the squad, then built the illusion of a campfire. Of life. Of survivors. Set the radio to transmit a repeating signal. Left hot food to bait the rescue party. Them. It was a death trap. Wrapped in hope. Lieutenant Kane realized it the same moment Danny did. Back. Back now. It's a setup. But the snow behind them shifted. Just once. A small crunch. Not theirs. Danny spun, heart rocketing up his throat. And out of the trees stepped a man in white. German winter camo, rifle raised. Then another, and another. 6, 7, 8 of them. Silent. Eyes black under their snow. Hoods. They hadn't stumbled into a trap. They were meant to walk into it. The first shot didn't come from the Germans. It came from Brannigan. A sharp crack from his M1 Garand shattered the tension, dropping the lead German with a bullet clean through the neck. The man crumpled into the snow like a broken puppet. Then hell broke loose. Gunfire erupted from both sides, snapping branches and lighting up the pre-dawn forest with orange flashes. Danny dove behind a dead tree trunk, bullets whipping over his head so close he felt the air burn past his ear. The snow kicked up in small explosions as rounds peppered the clearing, and someone screamed, high-pitched and short. The Germans weren't retreating. They were advancing, slow, quiet, deliberate. Like they weren't just trying to kill. They were collecting. This ain't no firefight. Brannigan shouted, firing off another shot. They're trying to box us in. Danny rolled behind a fallen log, heart hammering. He peeked out long enough to see 3 of them fan out, moving toward the corpses of the previous American squad. The bait. One of the Germans paused and crouched near the warm plate of food, using it as cover. That's when Danny noticed something that made his blood freeze more than the cold ever could. The plate hadn't frozen over. Even in the snow, even in the wind, it was still warm, still steaming. That meant it hadn't been there long. That meant they'd been watching. The Germans had been waiting the entire time, in the trees, watching the bodies, waiting for the Americans to show up like rats sniffing at cheese. This wasn't just a trap. This was a performance. And Danny's squad? They were the next act. Lieutenant Kane was shouting now. Flank east! Break out! We're not winning this here! But the east was already gone, covered in shadows and movement. Danny could see the shimmer of a bayonet gleaming low to the ground. The Germans weren't fighting like soldiers. They weren't making noise. No yelling, no commands. Just silent death pressing in from all sides. That's when the radio lit up again. Not just blinking now. Transmitting. But not in English. A cold, tinny voice crackled from the speaker in German, then switched, mid-sentence, to English. A voice, rough and raspy, almost mechanical. You follow dead men into the forest. You die beside them. Danny stared at it, heart slamming into his ribs. "They're using our radios," Lieutenant Kane's voice barked over the gunfire. "Move west, now!" They moved. No formation, no elegance, just raw panic. Danny scrambled up from cover, unloading 3 rounds in the direction of the trees. One of them found a target, a snow-camouflaged figure slumped against a birch with a soft grunt. Then came the howl. Not human, not natural, not something a man should make, a raw, guttural noise, like grief being torn from lungs. Danny didn't look back. The squad broke through the western tree line, stumbling and falling down a snowy embankment into a frozen stream bed. Kane took a round in the leg, went down hard, and Brannigan dragged him by the collar while still firing blindly uphill. Danny slipped in the ice and rolled. His rifle skittered across the ice, landing beside a frozen log. He crawled for it, chest heaving, hands raw. Another voice crackled through the second radio strapped to Kane's belt. This one, on their secure frequency. Only this time. It was Brannigan's voice. "Squad Alpha 9, do you copy? We're pinned near the iron fence, requesting immediate rescue. Supplies intact. All 6 alive. Repeat. Requesting rescue." Danny froze. So did Brannigan. He looked down at the radio on Kane's hip, then at Danny. His face went pale. "I never said that," he muttered. Danny whispered, "They're using our voices now." And in that moment, something broke loose inside all of them. Not fear, not just fear. Violation. The Germans weren't just killing them. They were becoming them, mimicking voices, copying transmissions, setting scenes, luring more Americans in, squad after squad, step by step. It wasn't a battle anymore. It was a harvest. And Danny knew something in that moment as clear as anything he'd ever known. They weren't walking into traps anymore. They were the trap. Snow fell harder now, thick and fast, dulling sound and smothering light. The forest around them felt like a tomb. Not just for the bodies, but for truth itself. Nothing was clear anymore. Not the trail, not the enemy, not even the airwaves. Danny Mercer crouched beside the frozen log, watching Brannigan stare at the radio like it was a piece of witchcraft. Kane lay behind them, half-conscious, his thighs soaked in blood that steamed in the cold. Behind them, back up the slope, the woods had gone still again. No gunfire, no movement, no voices. Just the sickening silence of men who knew how to wait. "Tell me you heard that," Brannigan whispered. "Tell me you heard my damn voice coming from that radio." Danny nodded slowly. "They recorded it. Maybe earlier, maybe today. Spliced it into the signal. Probably been listening in for days." Brannigan shook his head. "No, that wasn't a recording. That was live. My cadence, my breathing. Even the way I fumbled the word intact. I've done that before. In Bastogne." "That ain't a recording." Danny looked at him, cold creeping deeper than he thought possible. "Then that means someone's heard you speak before. Copied you. Learned you." The implication hung between them like a noose. Behind them, Kane groaned, trying to sit up. Danny moved to him, checking his wound. The tourniquet was tight, but it wouldn't hold forever. "We need to move," he said. "Now." Brannigan scanned the tree line, rifle raised. "We don't know what direction's safe." Danny wiped the snow from his map case, hands shaking as he unfolded the worn sheet of paper. "There's an old supply cache about half a mile west, pre-siege. If it's still there, it might have morphine, maybe even a working radio." Brannigan nodded. "Or maybe it's another trap." Danny didn't blink. "Maybe. But dying out here's a guarantee." They pulled Kane up between them. He gritted his teeth but didn't complain. Good man. Smart enough to know pain was better than silence. They moved. Slow. Deliberate. Eyes on every tree. Every snowdrift. Every shadow. The forest stretched wider here. Less dense, but no safer. The Germans had proven they didn't need trees to hide behind. They could hide in plain sight, in radio static, in corpses, in the sound of your best friend's voice. As they reached a slight rise, Danny spotted the old sign nailed to a tree, almost buried under snow. Cache 17B. U.S. Quartermaster. Do not disturb. They found the storage bunker half-collapsed under a mound of snow. The front was partially buried, the door frozen shut. Danny and Brannigan shoved with their shoulders, boots slipping in the ice, until it creaked open just enough to crawl through. Inside, it was pitch black and smelled like old wool and kerosene. Danny struck a match and froze. Lined neatly along the walls were boxes of supplies, bandages, rations, cans of lard, flares. But in the middle of the room, sitting on a folding chair like he'd been waiting, was a man, an American, wearing a 101st uniform, motionless, eyes closed, head bowed. The dog tag around his neck read, Latier Samuel Curtis, a name Danny recognized. He was KIA 2 weeks ago. He remembered the funeral, saw the casket loaded onto a truck himself. Danny whispered, Brannigan, that's Curtis. Brannigan raised his rifle. Curtis is dead. Danny crept closer, blood roaring in his ears. He looked at the man's hands, pale, clean, not frost-bitten. He wasn't frozen. He wasn't cold. He was warm, just like the food plate, just like the campfire, just like the trap. Suddenly, the man opened his eyes. Not wide, just a sliver, but enough. The pupils didn't react to the light. Dead eyes. Wrong eyes. Danny didn't even think. He pulled Brannigan back and shouted, Get out! But the door slammed shut. Shouted, Get out! But the door slammed shut. A mechanical click followed. Behind them, the figure of Curtis stood slowly, knees cracking, bones too stiff for a man supposedly alive. Then he spoke, but it wasn't his voice. It was Kane's. Help me. Help me. Supplies intact. Repeat. Brannigan backed away, rifle up, shaking. What the hell is that? Danny's voice cracked. That's not a person. The thing in the uniform tilted its head. Repeat. Squad Alpha 9, requesting rescue, food, warmth, come closer. It took a step forward. Danny fired. Once, twice. Center mass. It didn't fall. Not right away, but it leaked. Not blood. Something darker, thicker. Something that hissed when it hit the ground. The figure finally collapsed, limbs folding unnaturally, like a puppet with cut strings. The door creaked open on its own. No wind, no force, just invitation. Brannigan whispered, What the fucks are we fighting? Danny stared into the snow beyond the door. His breath slowed. I don't think this is just Germans anymore. The snow outside didn't feel like snow anymore. Danny stepped out of the bunker with his rifle still raised, expecting cold. But what hit him was different. The air was too still, too heavy, like it was pressing against his skin instead of brushing past it. The flakes falling now didn't melt. They landed on his sleeve like ash and just stayed there. Kane limped behind him with help from Brannigan, pale and silent. His wound was still bleeding, but they couldn't stop here. Not after what they saw inside. Not after Curtis, or whatever wore his skin, got back up. They didn't speak for the first 20 minutes. Not about the thing in the chair. Not about the hiss of that black fluid as it hit the bunker floor. Not about the door opening on its own. Finally, Brannigan broke the silence. You think that thing was German? Danny didn't answer right away. His eyes scanned the ridgeline ahead. the outline of trees like black teeth against the gray sky. "No," he said quietly. "I think it was worse." They kept moving, following the tree line toward an old rendezvous point marked on Kane's map, a logging shed used weeks earlier for resupply. Abandoned now. Hopefully. The sky darkened fast. Not with sunset, just clouds, thick and bloated with more snow. But there was no wind. No birds. Even the sound of their boots crunching the snow seemed dampened, like the forest was swallowing it whole. When they reached the shed, they cleared it cautiously. Empty, quiet, safe. At least on the surface. Brannigan barred the door with a timber beam. Danny checked every corner. No radios, no traps. Just stacked logs and a rusted wood stove. They laid Kane down beside the wall, elevating his leg. He was slipping into shock. Brannigan tried to get a fire going with dry bark and a single match, but the wood hissed and spit. It wouldn't burn. "That's not right," Brannigan muttered, striking again. "This stuff's bone dry." Danny didn't say anything. He just pulled off his glove and placed a hand on the logs. They were cold, yes, but not normal cold. It was like touching metal in the heart of winter. Like the wood itself was rejecting warmth. "Leave it," Danny whispered. "Don't waste the matches." They sat in silence for a while, listening to Kane breathe shallowly. His skin had gone waxy. He needed real medical help. Soon. "Think we can make it to the river?" Brannigan asked. Danny nodded slowly. "If we cut across the ridge. 12 clicks. Maybe less. Then, from outside, a crunch. Boots in snow. Then another." Danny raised his rifle. Brannigan moved to the window slit, and what they saw made them forget how to breathe. Silhouettes, dozens, maybe more, moving silently between trees, all dressed like Americans, unfirst uniforms, standard-issue parkas, U.S. helmets, but wrong, some too tall, some bent, some dragging limbs behind them, and none of them speaking. One of them, near the front, turned its head and stared directly at the shed. Not at the window, not at the sound. At them. Danny felt his spine go rigid. Then the figure opened its mouth. No words, no scream. Just that sound again. The one from the clearing. That howl. Like a man screaming underwater, broken and distorted. Kane jolted awake in terror, hands flailing. Danny grabbed his mouth to muffle him, eyes still locked on the thing outside. Then, one by one, the others started to answer. That same sound, echoing across the woods. Low. Warped. Hungry. It wasn't a patrol. It was a pack. Danny whispered, "We can't stay here." Brannigan shook his head. "We can't run." Not with Kane. But they didn't have a choice. Because outside, the first figures were already circling. Like wolves. Except wolves don't wear dog tags. Don't mimic dead men's voices. Don't wait for night. Danny leaned close to Kane, whispering fiercely, "We're getting you out. You hear me?" Kane nodded, eyes wide, too scared to speak. But aware. Alive. Brannigan handed Danny the last thermite grenade from his belt. Danny stared at it, then at the door. Then whispered, "When we move, we don't stop. Because if those things got through the door, it wouldn't be war anymore. It would be a harvest."